A faint distress signal was the only clue, until a Navy SEAL medic and his K-9 reached the mountains. What they found wasn't just a crashed helicopter, it was a trail of torn gear, blood-soaked fabric, and footprints that led deeper into the fog. But here's the twist. The survivors weren't just injured, they were running from something. And when Shadow, the K-9, locked onto the final scent, what he uncovered sent a chill through the entire rescue team. The question is, why were the survivors hiding and what was really waiting for them in those woods? Here's the full story, but before we continue, drop where in the world are you watching in the comments and hit that subscribe button. The call came in just after sunrise. A faint emergency signal, distorted and fading, had been picked up somewhere along the mountainside. Rescue crews assumed it was interference, maybe a false alarm. But the silence that followed was heavy, unsettling. Something was wrong. Within an hour, a small team of Navy SEAL medics was dispatched, accompanied by a police K-9 unit flown in from a nearby base. The dog, a trained German Shepherd named Shadow, had a reputation for finding the impossible. He had tracked through floods, fires, and even collapsed rubble where hope was nearly gone. The helicopter that carried them circled the valley once before dipping low. Through the thick fog, the broken silhouette of a downed aircraft finally came into view. A helicopter had gone down in the dense forest. Its tail was snapped in half, its rotor blades torn like twisted metal claws. Smoke rose faintly from the wreck, curling against the damp morning air. The crash site was eerie. No immediate movement, no voices. Just the groan of the wreckage shifting under its own weight. The SEAL medic leading the team, hardened by years of field trauma, scanned the area cautiously. Survivors might be trapped, or worse, they might not be there at all. Shadow's ears perked immediately. His muscles tightened, hackles rising, the leash pulled taut as he tugged forward, nose pressed to the ground. Every signal from the dog screamed urgency. He wasn't just alerting to wreckage, he smelled life. The medic crouched low, studying the dog. He gave one firm command, track. Shadow leapt into motion, but what he did next puzzled everyone. Instead of heading straight into the helicopter shell, Shadow circled it, sniffing furiously, before darting toward the trees. His body language was sharp, decisive. He was chasing a trail, and it wasn't random. Someone had been here. Someone had left the wreck. The forest swallowed him quickly, his handler sprinting close behind. The rest of the team exchanged uneasy glances before following. If survivors had walked away from that crash, time was everything. Minutes stretched thin as they moved deeper into the valley. Bits of evidence began appearing like fragments of a puzzle. A torn glove snagged on a branch. Faint footprints pressed into the mud, staggered and uneven, as if someone had been limping, a bloodied scrap of fabric. Questions mounted with every step. How many had survived? Why had they left the wreck instead of waiting for rescue? And most chilling of all, why did the trail seem hurried, almost as if they were fleeing something? Shadow halted suddenly, barking into the emptiness ahead. His body went rigid, nose pointing at a narrow ridge that overlooked a deep drop. The medic's eyes narrowed as he studied the steep incline. Something or someone was down there. But as the team leaned closer to peer into the ravine, a realization struck. The crash survivors had left clues behind, but they hadn't left willingly. The ridge dropped steeply into a gorge choked with fallen trees and jagged rocks. The medic scanned the slope carefully. No movement, no sound, just the restless bark of Shadow echoing into the void. The handler steadied the dog, giving him a quiet command. Shadow's ears twitched, nostrils flaring as if he were sifting through invisible threads in the air. Then, without hesitation, he lunged forward, dragging his handler toward the edge. The medic's heart hammered. Survivors wouldn't have come down here on foot, not in that condition, unless they hadn't had a choice. Ropes were quickly rigged, and the team descended carefully into the ravine. The air grew colder, heavier, the smell of smoke and damp earth clinging to their gear. Halfway down, the medic noticed something strange carved into the dirt. A long drag mark. Someone had slid or been dragged down into the gorge. At the bottom, Shadow shot forward, barking with a ferocity that cut through the fog. His paws churned the ground as he led them toward a dense thicket. There, partially hidden beneath leaves, was the first undeniable sign of life, a survival pack. Torn open, half its contents scattered. Water canisters, an emergency flare, and a blood-stained bandage told a chilling story. Someone had survived long enough to treat their wounds. But where were they now? Shadow pushed past the pack, nose glued to the ground. He pulled them deeper into the woods where the trail forked. One path showed heavier footprints, staggered, desperate. The other looked deliberate, with sharper impressions, like boots pressing firmly in rhythm. The medic froze. Survivors shouldn't be splitting directions unless someone else had been with them. For a brief moment, unease rippled through the team. Was it possible the survivors weren't alone when they hit the ground? Shadow made the decision for them. He lunged toward the path with the heavy, unsteady footprints, his growls low and urgent. They followed, the forest pressing in tight around them. The trail led them to an overhang where rocks had formed a shallow cave. Inside, the air was thick, almost suffocating. Flashlights cut across the darkness, and for a moment, nothing stirred. Then Shadow's bark exploded, his paws striking the ground near a collapsed figure. A man lay unconscious, his flight suit torn, his face pale. Blood seeped from a wound along his leg, but his chest rose faintly. Alive, barely. The medic rushed in, checking vitals, applying quick pressure to stop the bleeding. Relief mixed with tension. One life found, but the mystery only deepened. Because just as they began to stabilize him, Shadow turned sharply toward the far end of the cave. His nose pressed against the stone wall, his body rigid. He barked once, then again, pawing violently at the rocks as if something or someone was hidden beyond them. The medic's stomach sank. The survivor they'd found wasn't the only one here. The cave grew eerily silent after Shadow's bark. His paws scraped against the stone wall, nails grinding as if he could claw through solid rock. His low growls reverberated in the hollow space, each one sharper than the last. The SEAL medic motioned for silence. Everyone froze, listening. For a moment, nothing but the drip of water echoed inside. Then, faintly, too faint for human ears at first, a muffled sound. A cough. Weak, ragged, almost swallowed by the stone itself. Shadow barked again, pressing his body against the wall. He was no longer guessing, he knew. Someone was trapped on the other side. The team sprang into action. Hands worked furiously, clearing loose rocks, prying at the edges of the natural barrier. Every second stretched thin, the air heavy with urgency. The man they had already found groaned faintly as the medic stabilized him, but his weak gestures seemed desperate, as though he was trying to point toward the wall, too, confirming what Shadow had already revealed. The rocks gave way slowly, opening just enough to expose a narrow gap. A flashlight beam pierced through, cutting across the hidden chamber. What it revealed made the entire team pause. Inside, two more figures huddled in the shadows. One lay motionless, the other clutching at them desperately. Their flight suits matched the downed helicopter crew. Their faces were pale, their bodies weak, but their eyes caught the light, pleading alive. The medic's voice stayed calm, but inside, questions thundered. Why hadn't they stayed with the wreck? Why flee into this cavern, sealing themselves off behind stone? What had driven them to hide? The barrier finally gave way, and rescuers pulled the two survivors free. The conscious one clung to them, whispering words too faint to catch. The medic leaned closer, and what he heard chilled him. "They followed us." The words barely escaped his cracked lips before he collapsed into exhaustion. Followed? By who or what? The team exchanged grim looks. It wasn't uncommon for remote crash sites to attract danger, armed scavengers, wild animals, or worse. But the medic knew this wasn't random. The footprints they had seen earlier, the deliberate boot prints, were not from any of these crew members. Someone else had been here tracking them. Shadow's behavior only confirmed it. Even as the survivors were laid on stretchers, He kept pacing the cave mouth, ears pricked, nose scanning the air beyond. His instincts were never wrong, and right now they screamed of a presence still nearby. The medic's chest tightened. Their mission had just shifted. It was no longer just a rescue, it was also a race against something unseen. As they prepared the survivors for extraction, a distant sound cracked through the trees. Not natural, a deliberate snap like a boot on a branch. The team froze. Shadow's head whipped around, teeth bared, body trembling with focus. His bark tore through the gorge, sharp and commanding. Someone was still out there, watching, waiting, and whatever truth lay at the center of this trail of clues was about to surface. The forest fell into a dreadful stillness after Shadow's bark. The sound had cut through the gorge like a warning shot, echoing across the steep cliffs. The SEAL medic motioned the team to take cover, his eyes sweeping the ridgeline above. For long seconds there was nothing. Then came another deliberate crack of movement, this time closer. Whoever was out there wasn't fleeing. They were circling. Shadow's entire body trembled with intensity, nostrils flaring as he locked onto the direction of the sound. His tail stiffened, his frame lowering into the stance of a predator ready to strike. The handler tightened the grip on his leash, barely holding him back. The medic signaled two operators to move along the ridge, flanking quietly. Shadows shifted between the trees, and for a brief moment, a figure appeared. Human, armed, watching them. The pieces snapped together. The survivors hadn't just run from the wreck, they had been chased from it. Whoever brought that helicopter down hadn't intended for the crew to live, and now the pursuers had returned to finish what they started. Before the team could reposition, Shadow surged forward with a growl that shook the silence. His bark tore through the fog, a sound that carried pure authority. It was not random, it was precise, aimed directly where the threat moved. The figure above froze, startled by the dog's relentless focus. Within seconds, the flanking operators moved in, weapons raised, forcing the intruder to reveal himself. Under the sharp light of a flashlight, the truth was laid bare. Armed scavengers who had been following the wreck since it went down. Cornered and outnumbered, the intruders dropped their weapons, subdued without a fight. Shadow never eased his glare, his body guarding the survivors as if he understood the danger had finally been contained. With the immediate threat neutralized, attention shifted back to the injured crew. The medic worked swiftly, stabilizing wounds and starting IV fluids. Shadow pressed close, his steady presence calming the survivors who clung to life with fragile hope. Hours later, as daylight burned away the fog, a rescue chopper thundered overhead. The survivors were lifted one by one, secured safely aboard. The SEAL medic watched as Shadow climbed into the bird last, finally allowing himself to rest. His job was done, but not without proving once again that his instincts had saved more lives than anyone else's. As the helicopter rose, the medic looked down at the gorge below, the wreckage, the cave, the scattered clues. Every question now had an answer. The footprints, the drag marks, the hidden survivors, even the silence that had followed the distress call. Shadow had led them through it all, pulling the threads together until the truth stood clear. By the time the survivors were flown to safety, the team knew one thing with certainty. Without the K-9's relentless drive, no one would have made it out alive. And as the medic rested his hand on Shadow's harness, he realized something deeper. Machines could fail, signals could fade, but the bond between man and dog, that instinct to protect, to track, to never give up, was unbreakable. Shadow had not only found survivors, he had carried them back to life. And that was just one mission where a K-9 changed everything. Imagine the stories you'll miss if you don't stick around. Hit like, tap subscribe, and be here when the next mystery drops. You'll want to see how deep it goes.